Apologies, because it will be in English only, I'm afraid. But I'm told that I speak very clearly, so I hope that you'll understand. And this must be a very, very important occasion, because normally I never write a speech ahead of time. Normally I just, on the plane, think of a few things to say, write them down on the back of an envelope and hope that it goes okay. But I think 222nd anniversaries don't come along very frequently. And so I really did owe the wonderful Salomon family a proper talk. And so, written speech. And I never meant to come to Austria now at all. I'm not travelling. In principle, I'm not travelling at all this year, as you can see. I should really be far too busy updating a great big million-word book that I'm responsible for called The Oxford Companion to Wine for its 4th edition. But when Bert asked me to make a speech at this celebration, I must admit I was so flattered and so fond of the family that I just couldn't resist. Partly as well because as Vivinum veterans, we know so well how incomparable Austrian hospitality is. It manages to be both warm and efficient, which my fellow wine writers here will confirm is a very, very rare combination. But mainly it's because Nick and I are so fond of the Salomon family. I know that as wine writers we're all meant to be scrupulously independent and never to have friends on the other side among producers or wine merchants or whatever. But if you're someone, I have found, if you're someone with a heart and a brain, it is technically impossible not to have your favourites and your less favourites among the people in the world of wine. And I'm sure that you will all agree that once you've met Berthold, it is physically impossible not to like him. He was the first of the Salomons we came across when he was representing the Austrian Wine Marketing Board in the 1990s. And he always seemed a sort of huggable teddy bear, a rather tall teddy bear, but nevertheless a teddy bear. And he was certainly then as brilliant in this role as Willy Klinger is today. And the soul of kindness and innovation. For instance, you dreamt up Vivinum, didn't you? With Gert Hoffmann at the Hofburg in 1998. And Nick and I were, I think, privileged to actually attend that very sweltering occasion. So, subsequently, we were not remotely surprised to find that the rest of the Salomon family were just as delightful. And not to say both funny and glamorous in the case of Gertrude, which is another very rare combination. Mostly women are very gorgeous or very funny, but she's our younger daughter, Rose, became very good friends with the Salomon twins, her exact contemporaries, Bert and Faye. And I'm so pleased to see that they've both done the decent thing and followed their parents into the wine business. Faye spent some time with us in London last summer, and we've all spent time together in Austria, in London, in our house in the Languedoc, in New York, and in Sydney, which is amazing, really. Always making a special effort to meet up whenever our paths through this privileged world of wine looked as though they might converge. So you can see, I'm extremely fond of the Salomon family, which of course is why I am extra tough with my scores of their wines. Sorry about that. But anyway, we're here to celebrate this very special and hugely appropriate anniversary, the 222nd, with a family of twos. Bert and his late brother Eric, whose spirit is here, Bert and Gert, and Bert and Faye. It was back in the late 18th century that Johann Paul Salomon was lured by the salt trade from Salomonsbrunn in South Tyrol to Spitz in the Wachau to trade salt, wine and grain along the Danube. And in 1792, as we all saw as we walked in here, 222 years ago, he acquired the farm associated with the monastery Und, which seems odd to an English speaker that you call a monastery Und, but I'm sure you know why. Along with its vineyards, and founded the Salomon Undhof winery. 100 years later, Franz Xaver Salomon was running. I meant to ask you last night how you pronounce Xaver. How do you say it? Xaver? Franz Xaver Salomon was running the winery and was a real viticultural pioneer, apparently, being the first to trial American rootstocks in the fight against phylloxera. He favoured varietal wines over the gemischte Satz, then common, of course enjoying a resurgence now. In cooperation with the Agricultural Academy, he tried to convince colleagues of the advantages of picking later, because climate change hadn't yet struck. And according to Hans Fruwirt, in The 100 Personalities of Krebs, the quality of his wines were an important inspiration for many other winemakers. In 1932, Fritz Salomon, Bert's father, was the first to start estate bottling in the greater Wachau area, at about the same time as the practice was adopted in Burgundy. He was particularly and unusually cosmopolitan, sending his first wine exports to the USA in the late 1930s, just straight after the repeal of Prohibition. So that was being pretty clever about the export business. During his long reign, and he was responsible for both the amazing 33, which I'm really enjoying. I mean, you say it's sherry, it's actually very nice sherry, I think, and that incredible 64. Salomon Undhof established an unusually prominent international reputation, being the only privately owned Austrian winery to be mentioned by name in my friend Hugh Johnson's very first edition of the World Atlas of Wine in 1971. But please don't worry, we mentioned masses more of them in the 7th edition that came out last year. In that same year, 1971, Bert's brother Eric took over the winery after the sudden death of their father, and he, of course, was responsible for that amazing 72. He continued to strengthen the international presence of Salomon Undhof and was an influential member of the local council, cunningly managing to twin Krems with Beaune in Burgundy, which I think is very clever. Inspired by the Hospice de Beaune, he established the wine college Kloster Und in 1987. But meanwhile, he had the nice time. He was the wandering younger brother. He spent a couple of years in the early 80s in New York with Seagram's fine wine import arm, Chateau and Estate. And when he returned to Austria in 1982, he fell for his life's partner, Gertrude. Not just beautiful, but so usefully studying business and economics. Very clever. Together, they moved to San Antonio in Texas in 1986 to manage a wine importer that Schlumberger, Viennese fizz makers, had planned to take over. The deal fell apart and they returned to Austria, where Bert became a director of Schlumberger and Gertrude became marketing manager for L'Oreal. Where are you, Gertrude? Because I wanted to thank you for all those lipsticks. During his time with Schlumberger, Bert pioneered importing New World wines into Austria, including the leading Australian brand, Penfolds. Australia, of course, was to play a massive part in their lives. With their 2 young children, Bert and Gertrude first travelled there together in the early 90s. And together, with great prescience, they bought a farm in Finnis River and planted their own vineyard on the Fleurieu Peninsula, which was real pioneering at this time, because then it wasn't a very well-known wine area at all, but today it's becoming increasingly recognised as a seriously fine wine region in Australia. By the late 1990s, Bert was making his mark as managing director of the Austrian Wine Marketing Board and enjoyed 7 very successful years there that were suddenly cut short in 2004 when ill health forced the retirement of Bert's older brother, Eric. As Bert has just told us, Gertrude then decided to leave L'Oreal. He left the world of generic promotion, and together, ever since, they've divided their time between the family estates in Austria and South Australia. Terribly similar to say. It's very, very confusing. The family has always moved as one, the 2 children spending several months of each year, initially, at McLaren Vale Primary School, which doesn't seem to have done them any harm at all. Surprisingly. So, I would just like to propose a very heartfelt toast from all of us to one of the nicest families in wine, great ambassadors for Austrian wine in general, with many a happy memory of mine of delicious Salomon Unterhof wines enjoyed all over the world. So the toast is to the next 222 years.